Hello, everybody,
Hi there.
and welcome to
Evil Asterisk Podcast
with Jeannie
and Luis.
We saw Howl.
Woo!
Not to be confused with Allen Ginsberg's epic poem or another film called Howl that came out a little later. Oh, actually, it was earlier. In 2010, starring James Franco, which I believe is related to Allen Ginsberg. Yes, it's about Allen Ginsberg. It's sort of a biopic. This is from 2015. It's a British production, very indie. I'm going to give you the plot, but I'm also going to tell you who directed it, wrote it, and a few of the actors that are in it. It's an interesting cast. This is the IMDb description. When passengers on a train are attacked by a creature, they must band together in order to survive until morning. So we kind of know what this is all about. And that is the plot. That is basically the plot. It's a fairly simple situation, but tense. Directed by Paul Hyett, who also directed a film that we hadn't seen. It's now been added to our list called The Seasoning House.
Interesting.
And Rosie Day, who is in this film, Howl, is also in The Seasoning House. The Seasoning House is from 2012, and this film, Howl, is from 2015. So Paul Hyett, he is also known for doing special effects for films like The Descent, and actually one of the actors in this film is from The Descent as well. So, directed by Paul Hyett and written by Mark Huckerby and Nick Ostler. The cast, which is very interesting. The main person here, as far as we're concerned, the protagonist, is Joe, played by Ed Speleers, and he's played antagonists in shows like Outlander and You. Oh, he's also in Picard.
Yeah, he plays Picard's son.
It's Jack Crusher, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tells you something, right? Crusher.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But he often will play villains. So he is the protagonist in this. But what's strange is he's not getting top billing in the list. I'm not sure how they're listing it, but we're looking at a very interesting cast. There are a bunch of British actors in here that have great credits. Elliot Cowan, Rosie Day, Calvin Dean, Sam Gittins. Brett Goldstein even appears for a few minutes. He was in Ted Lasso. We saw him at the beginning. Shauna McDonald, I think she was in The Descent. But what's interesting is Sean Pertwee shows up as an and credit. So we're watching this and we're like, ooh, Sean Pertwee. And then he shows up for, 2 minutes?
He's there for 2.5 minutes, according to the trivia section on IMDb.
So if you see his name, don't be surprised when he's hardly there. If you're only watching this for Sean Pertwee, don't bother. Going back to Ed Speleers, who's the main character, he's a train guard. He was up for a promotion. He didn't get it. The dude from Ted Lasso got it.
Who's there for 2 seconds.
Who's also there for 2 seconds. That's Brett Goldstein. And I don't know if he's working an extra shift, but he's working sort of the graveyard shift, the red-eye shift for the train. It's going at night.
I don't think it's an extra shift, but I know that his love interest is definitely working.
He's interested in this woman. She's also on that same shift. It's late at night, and that's the premise. He's not in a good mood because he basically got passed over for a promotion. She says, yeah, try again, encouraging. So there's that premise of him not getting the promotion. You sort of think, well, what's going to happen here? Is he going to prove himself? One of the reasons he didn't get a promotion is that he would let people go on even if they didn't have tickets and stuff like that. And so he's very hardcore at the beginning of this particular shift on the train because one woman couldn't find her ticket and he had her pay him.
He starts modifying his behavior because he didn't get the promotion. The guy from Ted Lasso basically goes and says, yeah, you never charge anyone for those. There's a term that they use, almost like you're getting a ticket from a cop, and he doesn't charge the full ticket price for the people that don't have the special ticket for their segment.
So those of you who are familiar with Ed Speleers from You and Outlander, he often will play these villains. He plays a very different type of character here. He's very low key. He is Mr. Nice Guy, but also very serious. So he sort of grounds the film. What's interesting about this film, in addition to the cast, we've got a fairly small cast of characters, but they're all really good actors. And that's a treat. Because it's a small cast and it's primarily set on a train, it's almost like a play. So dialogue is very important in this. And I have to throw in here that it's a very simple storyline and a somewhat predictable storyline. I think there was a missed opportunity for the ability to really delve into these characters, because there is a very specific villain, and that's played by Elliot Cowan. The name is Adrian. He's interested in the same woman that our main character Joe is interested in. But he's also married, and he doesn't really care about this woman. He just wants to get her.
Yeah, I was about to say that. For him, she's just a fling. She's
Right.
just another possibility on the train. And there's even a woman on the train who was a past fling of this guy as well. The train is kind of his stalking ground in some ways.
Yeah, you find that out later. And she's sort of an assertive woman. She's the one that lost her ticket, and she was complaining. But during all of the action, she steps up a lot and helps out. She's a reliable person. The one person that you don't feel comfortable with is this Adrian character, who's clearly an ass, but he's the one who also warns people, hey, something's going to happen here. We'll get into that. The main issue here is that the train gets stalled and stopped on the tracks. Here's where Sean Pertwee shows up. He is the quote-unquote driver. We call that a conductor here.
Yeah.
Someone who actually drives the train or pilots the train. He gets out of the train, looks around, and then sees these antlers and a head of an animal.
Clearly
it wasn't a moose, it was an elk.
That the elk is a good word for it. I think the train clearly hit the elk, and that's when he hit the emergency brakes, and it was a very sudden thing. And now he's kind of inspecting the damage and possibly trying to get that elk out of there.
And then what happens, you have a POV, point of view of the creature that's loping out of the woods and attacks him. And then that's the end of Sean Pertwee. You see him with innards flying out. You know he's dead. Louise was like, well, he's not dead yet. You know, maybe he'll turn into something. And spoiler alert, this is a werewolf film. If that wasn't obvious by the title, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, you know, I was about to say that Sean Pertwee got eaten by a grue, but I guess it's a different universe.
But the joke is that Louise was so hopeful. He was like, oh yeah, well, you know, maybe he'll turn and he'll become a werewolf, and it'll be interesting with Sean Pertwee attacking everybody as a werewolf. But of course, when you see him lying there with a bunch of innards splayed out, you realize, nope, he's not going to become a werewolf. That was it. He probably had a few hours of work, and
well, clearly there wasn't enough budget to have him for longer. And there's a couple things. I found out the total budget for this was 1.6 million pounds sterling, which is not a lot. And Sean Pertwee was also in Dog Soldiers. His entrails were all over the place in Dog Soldiers.
That's true. And then I think the director, Paul Hyett, also did special effects for Dog Soldiers. So did special effects for Dog Soldiers and The Descent.
I gotta rewatch Dog Soldiers. I rented it on a DVD from like Hollywood Video or something like that right after I moved here.
Yeah. I saw it in the theater when it came out. I think I preferred The Descent as far as films go. Not the second one, though.
Oh, God.
We couldn't get past, 20 minutes on that one? That was our 20-minute rule. We couldn't even hit the 20-minute rule on that one.
Well, the joke is the first Descent takes place in the US, but also was shot, I think, in England. Yeah. And they did the same thing on the second one, but it was much more obvious.
Yeah, so that was Sean Pertwee. So a lot of it takes place when the train is stalled. People are wandering around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to fix it, trying to do this and that. And then at one point, one of the better scenes in the film, there's an elderly couple on the train. And Joe, Ed Speleer's character, was trying to be very by the book, but everybody was insisting get out of the train. He had to use his key and get everybody out of there. So he was going back to his, okay, I'm going to make everybody happy, because he realized, okay, I can't do the by the book stuff anymore. Now we're in a weird situation. I can't go in that direction anymore. I might just get fired, but I'm just going to deal with this. And allows everybody to get off the train so they can walk to the nearest station. But of course, what happens? Again, you realize there's the monsters, and of course they're werewolves in the woods, and one of them is having a beeline for the group, and everybody's trying to get back on the train. It's like, nope, we're not going anywhere.
But the first thing that happens is that Joe actually finds the body of the conductor, and then he tells everyone they need to go back, and then they start going back because they're thinking that he got eaten by wolves or something.
After Ed Speleer / Joe goes and finds the body of Sean Pertwee, the driver, he realizes everybody's got to get on the train. So some of the people are like, what are you talking about? I don't know if we hear howling at that point or what, but we do know at one point everybody's getting on that train a lot faster than they were before because something's coming at them. And then the last person who's trying to get pulled onto the train is this elderly woman from this couple. And by the way, this actress has quite a bit of credit. She's a veteran actress, and I'll give you her name in a moment. Her leg gets caught. They try to shut the doors quickly because there's clearly a werewolf. They think a general wolf, but we know it's a werewolf coming at the train, and they just close the doors onto her leg, and then she gets mangled by this werewolf, gets thrown up and down inside the train while her leg is still caught in the door. It's a nice dramatic sequence. It's a really good scene, yeah. Then they pull her in, you can see, her leg has been bitten and all kinds of blood. Luis and I are, yeah, we know what's going to happen to her. The actress's name is Ania Marzan. She is a veteran actress. She is originally from Poland, but has done a lot with British television and film. She was in The Wheel of Time, but I think one of the things that was interesting is that she played Voleth Mir in The Witcher. So then she has this horrible gash in her leg, and we're both going, oh, great. We know what's going to happen here because we know it's a werewolf story. We know she's going to turn at some point. No one else knows what's going on. They thought wild animal, a wolf or something. They bring her back on the train, and her demeanor starts to change. She looks like she's ill, and she becomes more sickly and more sickly as the rest of the film goes on. After she is brought back into the train, they wrap gauze on her leg, and they try to help her out, give her water and stuff like that. But the main thing now is they got to get out of there. So their whole thing is the conductor / driver is no longer with us. We've got a sick person on board. We need to get out of here. The Espelier's character, Joe, and another character played by Sam Gittins, Billy, they team up and they try to figure out what's going on with the train. Try to finish what Sean Pertwee is trying to do, investigate. They do discover that there's some sort of leak and they try to fix it. So that's the next goal, is to try to fix what's going on in the train so they can get out of there. Their whole thing is, we got to leave this area because there's clearly a wild animal, not knowing it's a werewolf, out here, and they've got to take care of that. That's the next step in the plot. There's some comic relief in the film, and one of the characters is a pudgy character played by Calvin Dean, and he is constantly eating or going to the bathroom. And what was funny is when everybody was outside trying to walk to the next station, they didn't realize they had left someone behind. They got back on the train after this whole thing with the elderly woman, Jeannie, getting bitten, and they didn't realize that Paul was still in the bathroom, and he had been in the bathroom the whole time. They had successfully left the train and walked to the next station. They would have forgotten him in the bathroom, and he would have been stuck there. Well, he ends up being kind of stuck in the bathroom. Who knows why? There was a problem with the door. It wouldn't open. First, you hear a lot of bang, 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 and you think it's perhaps the werewolf attacking the train. And Luis and I had talked earlier about who's going to die and who do we want to die. We obviously went the annoying, bratty Nina, because she was being really noisy and annoying the elderly couple. We wanted her to be one of the ones to go. Also, the Adrian character, who's screwing everything in sight and thinks he knows everything, we wanted him to go. And then I thought, well, there's another character that's probably going to get killed off. It's the chubby guy, Paul. He probably will get bitten or killed during this movie. And of course, that does happen.
She just mentioned the guy's name. He's called Football Fan by the captions. All the characters have these kind of descriptive names without really using their character names in the captions. This is a weird way to do the captions. But I think it's interesting. Like, it was taken directly from the script and not from the character names.
Yeah, Adrian was called Assertive Man, right?
Exactly.
Even though he was an ass.
And the older woman was Elegant Woman, I think, or something
she
like
was.
that. All those names are like that.
Was it Glamorous
Woman? Glamorous Woman.
So going back to the comic relief, we hear bang, bang, bang. And Luis and I both look at each other and like, well, who wasn't in the group? That guy, Paul, who's always in the bathroom. And that's part of the joke, is that he's almost always in the bathroom. He's either sitting there eating or he's in the bathroom. That's why there was noise. And we were right. It wasn't a werewolf banging on the train. It was him in the bathroom trying to get out, locked in.
And the movie was really poking fun at football fans in Europe. He's saying they're overweight, they're slobs. That's kind of the stereotype. I don't think Americans think that American football fans are all like that, or to that degree. But in the UK, they have a stereotype.
I think we have that stereotype here as well, where we have the bros with their football shirts on and they have tailgate parties, a bunch of hot dogs and woo, And it's funny because there is a football game, right? Is it happening today?
I think it's football.
There's an American football game that's going to be going on. We heard someone go woo earlier, so we may hear that during this podcast. So there was that element of comic relief, but unfortunately, we kind of spoiled it for ourselves because we were thinking too carefully about who wasn't in the group, and we realized that guy was probably in the bathroom. So when we heard the bang, 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 we're like, oh, it's the guy in the bathroom. And everybody else was like, oh, what's that?
Yeah. Well, the movie's mistake was to make him too obvious and too noticeable earlier. So the memory was very fresh in our minds that this guy was in the train during the crash somewhere.
And we see too many horror films to know that it's always the goofy guy or the guy that's being portrayed as a goofy guy. Even if he's lovable and we like him, he often will get attacked. It's a trope that's used in almost every horror film. Even though this is not considered a horror comedy, there are some comedic elements that I think the director and writers were trying to portray. But that one was lost on us, unfortunately. And maybe other people wouldn't have paid attention to the fact that he wasn't in the group and forgot he was in the bathroom. It did make some sense that you would forget he was in the bathroom because time had gone by. But Luis and I are just too particular. We were looking at the characters going, who's missing? Is it definitely a werewolf that's banging? But there was someone missing from the group, wasn't there? We were being too analytical. The other things that I can say about it without going deeply into plot is that there were some interesting modifications to what we would call the werewolf turning process. For example, the quote-unquote glamorous woman, Jeannie, as I mentioned before, she looked pretty sickly. You could tell it was getting worse and worse. Good makeup. You could see that slowly, gradually, her face was looking more and more sickly during a fairly long period in the movie. I think it was about a 20-minute period. We'd have other action going on, trying to fix the train, having these weird conversations with some of the characters, fear, some suspense. And then you have her in the corner. You know what's going on. You know she's going to turn. That's why it's an interesting element of suspense because the audience knows what's going to happen. The characters don't know because they're convinced it's just a general wolf out there. It's not a werewolf. However, there is one character that seems to know what's going on, and that's Adrian, the guy that we love to hate. He's the one who is convinced that this could be a werewolf situation. So Jenny's husband, Ged, an older actor as well, he is like, oh, honey, are you okay? What's going on? You're getting sick. He's completely clueless about what's going on with her. But Adrian seems to know, and he doesn't want to be anywhere near her. But because he gets kind of violent, he starts to do something to her, which then makes them tie him up. But they tie him up right next to her.
At some point, he decides to attack her with an axe.
As if that's going to do anything.
So they disarm him and they tie him up next to her.
As if that's going to do anything. It's not silver. And he knows about the silver trope in Werewolf.
The reason they know it's not a wolf and it's not a bear or whatever is because of the guy who's reading a book. He knows the region. He knows the forest that they're currently in. And he knows that those animals haven't been seen in centuries in that area.
Wolves.
Wolves and bears.
No wolves. Yeah, his name is Matthew, played by Amit Shah. There's a bookish character. He is the quote-unquote smart guy. They all have those little stereotypes. He's on the train, and he's the one who says, it can't be a wolf because somehow Adrian comes up with this concept that it could be a werewolf. I'm wondering if Ged, the husband of Jenny, he's the one who talks about, I think it was 1969, there was something that happened with a train in this area and all of the passengers disappeared. No one has seen them since.
Or were found mutilated. So there was a subgroup of characters on this same train during a full moon. So there had been a lot of talk about lore, and we should say this whole movie happens during the night of a full moon. Duh, right? So there's been this talk about this lore for decades now about this group of passengers that disappeared, never to be seen again. So we start to realize, wow, there's more than one werewolf out there. And we start to see snippets of that. We start to see some dropping from trees, different genders out there living together, almost like a family. So it looks like a whole other
culture has formed in the woods with these werewolves, and they hang out together, and that's where they live. Now, we know from lore that werewolves will turn back to their human form at some point. I don't think, though, that this happens with these particular werewolves. Either they turn back to human form and they don't leave the woods and they've got some place to stay out there and they do that to just keep away from everybody, or they go back into society.
Clearly, the movie is not going through the werewolf legend or lore through the point of view of being some magical thing or a curse. The usual rule for werewolves is that there's one werewolf, whoever he attacks, that doesn't eventually die, may get the curse if the original werewolf itself dies. It gets transmitted from one to the other. In The Wolfman, the father gives it to his son, even the remake that came out in the mid-2000s. And the whole silver bullet thing or silver elements, and like Jeannie said, transforming in the full moon. This movie seems much more preoccupied with making the werewolf thing a disease. They even speak in those terms. It's something you catch and then you mutate into a hybrid. They even call it a hybrid between man and wolf. So, like Jeannie was saying, all of these werewolves in the woods probably a werewolf all the time and become animal-like in that way. And they just happen to be hunting that creature in the full moon when the creature gets hit by the train and they see like a human being just kind of roaming the tracks and kill him.
Right.
So yeah, the movie doesn't really care about any of the traditional werewolf stuff, to the point where the werewolves themselves don't really look like movie werewolves.
And we should talk a little bit about that. We've got, I would say, 3 examples of what a werewolf looks like in this movie. We have Paul sitting on the toilet, getting stuck in the bathroom, getting attacked. And then a werewolf emerges, apparently jumps onto the train through the bathroom and goes through the bathroom door at some point and walks out and starts to attack our protagonist and other characters. And you have a nice close-up of the makeup, the face.
I think it's disappointing. I think the biggest problem with the movie is the werewolves.
Oh, I don't have a problem with the face, though. I had a problem with the skin. The first close-up you see of a werewolf is after the werewolf attacks Paul in the bathroom. You don't really see that attack. It's very hard to see what was going on there, but emerges from the bathroom, starts to attack our protagonist and other characters on the train. And you have a close-up of the face, the jaw coming out, the eyes looking angry. You can see it's a male character with this unusual looking face with teeth coming out. It doesn't look like what we would expect from a werewolf that we've seen in other films. It looks a little different from that. Then you have the family of werewolves out in the woods. They look hairier, whereas the werewolf that we saw on the train has more of a, I almost like to say, vegan chicken looking skin. It's an unusual choice. Now remember, this is a special effects artist that worked on The Descent and Dog Soldiers and decided to go in this direction, which was very different. But you have a hairier version. We saw more fur with the family that's outside. Then we have the eyes sort of glowing in the dark. We didn't have that as much with the character that attacks Paul in the bathroom and starts to attack everybody on the train. The axe, which is not a silver axe, is used to bash the face in of this particular werewolf that's on the train. That werewolf never comes back to life. That werewolf is dead. Baby, because if you bash the head in, you kill the werewolf even if it's not silver. It doesn't transform into a human after it's dead, like we've seen in other films. We basically don't see it anymore.
None of the more mythical take on werewolves is in this. We really wanted to ground this thing in quote-unquote reality. It's trying to be too biological for my taste.
Almost zombie-esque disease.
Exactly. The
type.
werewolves have this loose/burned skin, and they have very short snouts, too much like a human being. And I was doing some research on Reddit after the movie, and most people agreed that werewolf movies where the werewolves have more of a wolf-like face with a long snout and a lot more hair, body hair on the back and the legs and the arms, they work much better than trying to make them into some human mutant wolf thing.
That was the choice here, but it strangely was dissimilar from what we could see. I don't know if it's the lighting or something else. Between this character that's on the train that attacks everybody looks different, in our opinion, from the characters that are out in the woods. This character is part of that group. On the train with different lighting, there's not as much hair. It's the skin, as I said, like vegan chicken. It doesn't look hairy. There's not much hair as far as I remember. But whereas outside in the dark, you can see more hair and they look different. So I don't know if these were different models, different choices that were made by the director. But in any case, there's a third type of werewolf. The elderly woman, Jeannie, ends up transforming into yet a third type of werewolf. And guess what? Looks like a vampire. It's very strange. The way in which the character is ultimately killed is very vampire-esque. First of all, she's looking like she's having a grand old time with her transformation, the actress. She's having fun.
Really living it up.
She is chewing the scenery. She's going, and she's taking her fingernails and woo, and kind of dancing around people. And there were a couple of things like that where I think it's supposed to be comic relief, but it didn't fully work. It was kind of goofy. She looks kind of like a vampire with her teeth coming out, not like teeth of a werewolf, but teeth of a vampire. And she's not fully transformed.
And behaves like a vampire and gets killed like a vampire.
Not fully transformed. She doesn't have hair from what we could see, other than her regular hair, which is now no longer in her bouffant updo or whatever she had. And it's kind of stringy. That's fine. Her eyes change color, I think. Glow in an unusual way. Her mouth is what changes the most, and it's like vampire teeth. And she goes to her husband, and she looks like she's attacking him like a vampire would. It doesn't look like the way a werewolf would attack a person. And what is used to kill her? It looks like a stake. They take a pole, and they just ram it through her like you would with a vampire using a stake, like a wooden stake, but this is a metal pole.
She's impaled.
It felt like a different creature altogether. So we're looking at what appears to be 3 different types of makeup for werewolf characters.
But I'm pretty sure also the first werewolf, the one that comes in through the bathroom, has an animatronic face. And then the body has that skin applied to it. But I just found the whole reveal of the full werewolf in this first instance very weak, and it hurt the movie because he was killed very easily. You would think that a werewolf could really, with one gash, almost split a man in half. In this case, this one werewolf is being attacked by a bunch of nobodies with no military training, nothing special, and they just kill it. I know they make them more dangerous later, but if you really look at the way they move in the forest as a pack, they never look dangerous. They always move in this goofy way, almost zombie-like. I think it's the whole idea that they are mutations, just happen to be a hybrid creature that's not long for this world in some ways. It took some of the impact away.
I wonder if the writers and director decided, or the writers maybe alone, decided that maybe the werewolf topic was overdone or had been done so many times that they wanted to do something different. Obviously, we didn't have our pandemic until, end of 2019. We're looking at a movie from 2015. And there have been many, many films about pandemics and zombies and things like that. And maybe the idea was, let's take vampires, zombies, and werewolves and sort of explore this general idea of a monster. Also, consider the fact that there could be a whole pack of them as opposed to the solo werewolf that you often see. There's a pack and they're living together. The problem is there wasn't enough depth in this exploration. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, there wasn't enough depth in the characters. The actors were great. Again, if any of you know who these actors are, it's definitely a treat to just watch it for that reason, even as a curio. But there was so much opportunity to make this more like a play and to really get into the nitty-gritty of these characters' pasts and their relationships and ways of handling this scary situation. Who's going to step up to the plate, who isn't, who's afraid, who isn't, and why. There wasn't enough of that. And then at the same time, there were other opportunities to explore what happened to this set of people in the 60s who obviously a subset turned into werewolves, and they perhaps have been living out there ever since, and they aren't going to die. They just remain alive for who knows how long, centuries maybe. Why? What is their life like? And what's going on there? We didn't have any of that.
No.
There was no response to the death of any of their family members either.
Yeah. I think zombies were still very much in vogue in the mid-2010s. Maybe they really wanted to move away from the more folklore-like werewolf tradition. They wanted to root this in reality. They want to say, hey, this is just everyday people taking the train back home at midnight. Could happen to you. Something that could have very well happened in real life. Why? Because who knows what's in these forests that we cross doing 85 miles an hour on a train, never to think about it again. Maybe there's something lurking in there. Maybe there's animals or species that we don't recognize as real that are still there. And what if you break down in the middle of such forests and they happen to be hunting? I think the screenwriters were really, really trying their best to go in this direction. So when they work with a guy who is a visual effects specialist, a makeup specialist, he says, okay, I can make them more like the mutated creatures from The Descent. Make them more biological. Skew all the long snout, hair everywhere, basically like a gigantic wolf that walks in two legs. They even inverted the knee position. The knees are inverted.
The backward legs, knee is bent back.
Yeah.
So we got that as well. You're right. All of these visuals were shown in this particular film.
In alien movies, often you have the knees being inverted, like that Charlie Sheen movie from 1996. So this and
It's
that.
like a demon, though.
Demons
I always
often have normal knees.
But when I see the backwards knee, I always associate it with...
It's because of the goats and those kinds of animals.
Right,
that have...
but the goat is considered a demon. I guess it's used in certain folklore, but often in a demon fashion. You're right, aliens are sometimes depicted that way. They didn't show the full body when they had that shot with the knees bent in reverse.
Yeah.
They would show only the legs. And they also showed, didn't they show an interesting claw that only had two nails going along the train?
I think it was a hand. It was like this.
So it was the full claw. Suffice it to say that there seems to be a hybrid of different types of creatures being used in this to create something new. But maybe it was just too much because it confuses the audience. You have all these different looking creatures, but they're all supposed to be werewolves.
Well, I think they're trying to make a point that they were all individuals. They're all individual humans who got infected by this and mutated into a werewolf form. That's why they all look a little different from each other. I think that was on purpose. They really wanted us to see these beings as previous members of the human race. And like Jeannie said, they wanted us to see them as having formed a new family in the woods. Mm-hmm. I just think that for all the good things that this movie has, it gets a little bit undone by the creature design.
Other impressions. Do you want to talk about yours?
Yeah, if you're looking for a very fun, well-made, effective werewolf film, and you think you'll be very happy with this. I think it's worth your time if you're into this particular genre and subgenre. If you're not a werewolf person, you're gonna hate it because it doesn't deliver outside of being a cool, neat, indie werewolf film.
If you like monster movies, you'll like it, just in general. But if you're very much into canon as far as werewolves go, you might have a problem with it.
Yeah, you're gonna be disappointed. For 1.6 million pounds sterling, this is outstanding. If you think about how good it looks, how each shot is framed, the music is really interesting. The music changes personality throughout the movie. It goes from ethereal, which Jeannie mentioned during the movie, during the screening, to thumping, a little bit of an electronic beat. At some point, it was sounding like Doom 2016. So it's very interesting music, almost better in average than the movie itself. It's well lit. It's shot with Alexa digital camera. It looks good. It could look a little better. I think it was a little more high contrast, slightly warmer colors, but they wanted to show, in the middle of the night in England. That's probably why they went with a duller / colder color palette. I would have liked more contrast. The creatures are a big problem for me. The moment I saw the one get killed by normal people in the train car, oh God, that really kind of killed me. But I still think the characterization and the writing, which Jeannie called serviceable, are effective. It's not like the writing jumps out in your face and you can stand hearing it. It flows. It's funny, even if a couple things are overused. A couple expressions like the word sweet are used more than once and by different characters in different contexts.
But it's a British term. It might be a very popular term that might not be overused in that case.
In general, the writing is good. It's not great. Maybe you can say good enough. Directing is excellent. Music is excellent. It's moody. The first jump scare got us, but then there was no other scares. It was a growl and a sudden noise underneath the seats, and it turned out to be like a little dog from the glamorous woman from Jeannie.
That's funny.
So that was really effective. And the characterization was interesting, if superficial. Like Nina, the girl who I guess is 19 or 20 or something like that, Rosie Day, she's on the phone all the time and being kind of loud and ignoring.
Singing.
singing, ignoring the guard, ignoring the protagonist when he asks for her ticket. Superficial but effective. That's a good way to describe the whole thing. It's a movie that punches well above its weight, and it tries very hard to be a fun creature feature. And I think it succeeds.
I feel like it delivered what I expected. For some reason, I expected the movie to be like this. It wasn't a surprise. I wasn't shocked. I did feel it was serviceable. I was impressed with the actors. I think they were great. But in a way, because they were so good, I wanted more from them, and they didn't have enough to work with, in my opinion. The script was fairly thin. It was a simple story. It didn't dig in, and I think that was intentional. I don't think that the screenwriters were trying to dig in. I think they were trying to do just a general film that didn't focus on any deeper meaning with regard to werewolves and society, what was going on in the woods, the characters on the train. In reality, you wouldn't necessarily get to know these characters very well. Even in a situation like this, it's not like you have a lot of downtime to go, yeah, tell me about your past. In a film, you expect to see that. You expect a little more depth. I do agree with Luis that the creatures were not as effective as you would like them to be visually, and the way they acted, just the choices that were made. I think Paul Hyett knows what he's doing. He's done an amazing job in other films. In this case, maybe he was bogged down with the directing, or maybe he just decided to make certain choices. But it wasn't really scary. As Luis said, I had forgotten about the jump scare. The jump scare made us both think that there was going to be more later that would be jumpy, and it wasn't. The most effective sequence was probably with the leg getting caught in the door and her jumping up and down. It made you think, wow, what is going on outside that's making her go from the top of the train to the bottom, to the top of the train to the bottom with her legs stuck outside. Ooh, that made us excited and wonder what was next, and then it was just a bit disappointing as we went on.
Yeah, Jeannie has a point, because that entire sequence, when most of the passengers get off the train and they're deciding to walk the tracks back to the station, and the body of the conductor is found, and then they start hearing the werewolf sounds, the wailing and the howling, and all those sounds that are actually mixed incredibly well, and the sound effects work beautifully. It's really haunting, and you're like feeling like some big threat is approaching. And they're now running back to the train, and then the woman gets stuck with her leg out, and like Jeannie described, this whole sequence, all the way through when they're back in the car, is excellent. And why does it work so well? It works well because we haven't seen the creature yet. That's why it works. Because the sound design is so effective, and it's so well done, and the action's great. And like Jeannie said, this is the highlight of the movie.
That particular sequence was effective, but I think not because we hadn't seen the creature yet. Physically, we saw a blurred version outside of one of the werewolves before the attack happened. That was nice. That was effective, actually. We didn't see all the makeup up close, which maybe was too well lit on the train, and that was part of the problem, I think. We hadn't seen any of that yet. Also, the feeling of strength of her going up and down and up and down. Our imagination was, wow, there's a really strong creature out there. It's gonna mangle people. Well, what happens? We finally see the character, as Luis said, and it was like, oh, it wasn't that scary. But it was also what the character did or did not do. Actually, Luis touched on this earlier. We've got a whole mob of people, I guess, that overpowered this creature that's supposed to be so powerful that one of them took this leg and just went up and down and up and down and banged this woman around. We thought it was going to be a lot more intense on the train itself. We didn't get that. So I think that's part of the problem. There was no real trade-off. So we had a situation where the script wasn't really deep with regard to the character backstories and the character relationships, and then even exploring what was going on in the woods. And then we thought, okay, if we don't get that, we'd at least want to have more scares. And we'd at least want to have more intensity with the deaths and the gore. We need something that makes it a true monster film. But we weren't fully getting that either. So it was sort of like backing off on both fronts.
Yeah, it's fun, but there's a couple missed opportunities here, and I can't help but think that maybe the reason this happened is because they just didn't have the time or the budget to really do more. Maybe the movie needed, like Jeannie said earlier, a smaller scope Maybe they should have never gone outside. Maybe they should have stayed in the train car the whole time. Something she said, I think she's right. It would have been more fun if the train was moving the whole time. If someone was a werewolf in the train with them and just happened to turn during their journey.
Yeah, and they have different cars on the train.
Yeah.
At the beginning, the train looked much bigger because Joe, the main character, was wandering from car to car to car. Now, of course, there are not many people on the train because it's this late night train. We get that. But they were dispersed throughout the entire train itself with different cars. If someone had turned in one of the cars, I guess they were trying to take care of her, so it does make some realistic sense. There was a lot of realism in this movie in a weird way. It does make some sense that they'd all be gravitating toward one car. Then you don't have a situation where some people in the other car don't know that someone has turned. There's no wandering back and forth. I think making better use of the interior of the train and the different cars that are there would have helped the film.
Yeah, there's also no transformation. And the transformation, quote unquote, that the elegant lady or the glamorous lady goes through is meaningless.
Right.
Because she turns into a vampire.
And it might have been the beginning of what would have been the werewolf transformation, but then why not show that?
Yeah, like I was thinking she should have gone at some point away off screen and then transform to our eyes only, for example, and then show up again. But no, she barely has a transformation, barely above vampire level, immediately gets killed. A werewolf movie without a nice transformation is a big problem for me.
One of my favorite movies of all time, An American Werewolf in London. Love that film for many reasons. The use of music, the transformation, the backstory, the love story, the friend, Griffin Dunn, remember? He shows up. Love it.
And I adore The Howling. I think The Howling is just incredible. The werewolf in The Howling looks terrifying. So to walk away from those successful examples and then give us a werewolf that immediately gets murdered by a mob of nobodies and in a train cart in a small enclosed space where you would think the werewolf could kill all of them without much effort. I think that's what hurts this film. It's the fact that they're trying so hard to make the werewolf into a biological entity that's realistic and or possible in our world, that they take away much of what makes werewolves terrifying. So just seeing them doing their interpretive dance when they're in a pack and kill someone in the woods, you can immediately tell they're not supposed to be this mythological threat. When they have characters die in the woods, and I think it happens with a couple of them, when the pack hunts and kills people in the woods, the way they move is ridiculous. It takes away from the threat that really should be posed by such creatures.
I think there were a lot of missed opportunities, as Louise said. I think the train itself going through this interesting forest and the colors that they're using. Some of the colors are intriguing because they're the interesting blues and reds, but then it turns into sort of a muddy gray. It helps with the creatures because you can't really see them against the muddy gray, and they are more intriguing to me instead of being well lit on the train. I think that actually helps with the monster element. So Nina at some point gets killed. She gets grabbed from the window of the train. Big clawed hand grabs her and pulls her outside of the train. At some point, they look for her outside. Matthew, the bookish guy, ends up finding her. She's calling, "Hey, help, help, help." She's still alive, and she's stuck to a tree. Her head is kind of lolling down and she's all bloody. I had forgotten about that sequence. The reason why I'm even talking about that now is that Louise was just reviewing with me the interpretive dance that these characters were doing because I didn't remember the interpretive dance, and I agree. There is some weird dancing or movement, let's say, interpretive movement that is happening with the creatures in the woods. But that particular death, that's a good one. She's stuck in a tree, she's bloody, she's still alive. That's scary. It's not a jump scare. As Louise said, the only jump scare was the dog. The yippy dog at the beginning. At the very end, there are only two characters left, we think. We see Joe, played by Ed Speleers, and Ellen, played by Holly Weston. They are in the woods. And you realize that the creatures are crowding in on them. Joe says, "Run, run," and then Holly runs. So she ends up being the only one that survives. But in the meantime, you don't see what happens to him, but you assume he's either killed or turned. And then we see the pièce de résistance at the very, very end. Adrian, the antagonist, is still alive and he's in the woods. But guess who gets to kill him? The protagonist, Joe. So we see at the very end Joe as a werewolf with his big teeth and his beady eyes, very similar to the vampire-esque Jeannie on the train, but scarier because he's angry. He growls, and then you hear some screams, but that's the end. That's the end of the movie. The other thing that happens right before that is that we see the character of Ellen go back to the train station. She's all bloody. She's carrying his badge. And that's basically it. Here's another thing about the film. It started out with him getting passed over for a promotion. And I guess what they were trying to say at the end was that he deserved that promotion. He saved her life. He stepped up to the plate and he was very brave. There were a lot of brave people on that train, though. Almost everybody on that train was fairly brave. So it's not like that one protagonist character stuck out as the brave one, the savior, the one that really deserved the promotion. So even that particular story, the impetus for the entire film, that doesn't really get resolved either. So I think there are a lot of plot issues and story and character-driven issues. There were so many opportunities to do more, aside from the whole monster stuff, which had its own problems. There were a lot of opportunities to do more with the story and characters.
The other issue is very low quality CG shots from outside at an elevated angle of the train itself when it's stuck in the woods. Those are clearly CG, and of course they don't have a real train to work with. They shot at Waterloo Station, that's all real. But once they go into the woods and the train gets stuck on the track, they have these faraway shots showing the snow and the cold weather, and it just looks kind of low rent, and that's because they didn't have the ability to really have a real train at night with that kind of weather and have some nice plate shots of it. It doesn't affect the craft itself. It's still well directed, great sound design, really good music, very professionally made. If you rented at a Blockbuster, you would be happy.
Way back when.
Getting this as a creature feature.
Yeah.
To watch it on the weekend.
It's a nice little popcorn film.
You would be very happy. It's better than a lot of werewolf movies that get made every year. I don't want to sound too harsh. I think the problem is that there's so much wasted potential. If they just had narrowed down the scope, if they just make it more about, like Jeannie said, a stage play structure, where they're all stuck in a moving train. Even Terror Train does a better job of this one in some ways. The train is moving. Someone happens to be a werewolf. They weren't expecting to turn in the train itself.
Right. And the idea of Terror Train was someone happens to be a murderer.
Yeah.
It's a similar concept, and they're wandering around and you don't know who it is, and it's like a whodunit type of thing, which is interesting because that's the surprise for the audience. Here we have the suspense possibility, but it's never realized.
Yeah, the cool possibilities of, oh yeah, a passenger happens to be a werewolf. Who is the werewolf? Oh, is the woman gonna transform? Of course, they all know when she starts to transform. There's no suspense there whatsoever. There's only this idea that, oh, she's going to go too far and then she's going to kill a bunch of people. Nope.
Well, it's funny because if there was a different premise as opposed to the train getting stuck and the family of werewolves out there, right? Brett Goldstein kind of looked like a werewolf at the beginning. It was sort of funny because he was this nasty, haha, I got the promotion and you didn't. Looks directly at the camera, I think, at one point. And he has that werewolf look, and I'm thinking, not knowing exactly what's going to go on. Is he going to end up on the train? Is he the werewolf? What's happening here?
Yeah.
Who's the werewolf? And we always think in terms of a werewolf, again, as one person who gets turned. And so that makes it more interesting because you're thinking, who's going to be the werewolf? Who's going to turn? Who's going to scratch or bite someone else? But we don't have that at all.
No. And this one werewolf, this lone werewolf, is usually very, very hard to kill. So when they finally kill him or her at the end, it's a big deal. But on this movie, at the beginning of the second act, he gets killed by a bunch of nobodies.
Yeah, but he's one of many, and that's a problem too. So the lore isn't being followed to a T. So if any of us who are used to particular werewolf lore and we want to follow that, that's a problem. Now, if we're going to go beyond that and do something a little more creative and not follow lore, there has to be a payoff, and there isn't.
Watching the film and then immediately after the film was done, I still had a very positive impression of it because it is fun. And I was saying earlier, I think delivering a fun creature feature, a fun horror movie, should never be taken for granted. It's so hard to do something that's fun to watch, that is worth your time.
I think it's worth seeing. I will say that, as you also said, the direction is good. The director did a good job. This is not someone who started off directing, and I think he's doing a really good job. Good music, like you said. The actors, casting, great. The archetypes, a great jumping off point, but didn't go far enough. But fun to watch because there was no problem with the acting. And that's the thing. If there had been some shoddy acting, That would have been a big problem with the film. So that all works. The problem is the script needed more work, the story needed more work, and strangely enough, even though Paul Hyett is a special effects person, the special effects needed more work.
True. And just to speak further about the lack of polish on the script itself, a couple examples. So Nina is being really annoying early on. She's annoying the elegant lady. And that's set up as a point-counterpoint thing where they're going to get into it eventually. Nina has been annoying them for quite a while. So you would assume it would be a nice payoff, like Jeannie said, for at some point, Jeannie, who's becoming a werewolf, does something terrible to Nina, because Nina has been pissing her off when they were both human. So it would make a lot more sense for her to attack Nina. But instead, Nina gets snatched by an anonymous werewolf through a window and only pops up much later in the film in a completely unrelated sequence just to be bait for the bookish guy to find her and then get killed himself. That's a perfect example.
So instead of attacking Nina, she attacks her own husband. And they have a great relationship, but that, again, made me think of vampires because she attacked him in such a way as sort of like, join me, and then she bites his neck, and she's acting like a vampire. So it's very confusing. It takes you right out of the movie because you're like, wait a minute, why is she doing this?
And then if we look at the husband, he's underdeveloped. You would think he's some sort of a military veteran. Maybe he fought in the Falklands against Argentina. Maybe he's old enough to have something to do with a different war. Or maybe he didn't fight in any wars, but he happens to be retired from the army. Come on, give us some reason why this guy is in on this train, and not just as the loving husband of an elegant woman who's going to turn into a werewolf and kill him instead of anyone else that matters. So I think, like Jeannie mentioned earlier, if we look at the stereotypes or the cliches for the characters, which are well done early on, and then how they use each character and how they play against each other, that's not done well.
They had the ingredients, and they gave us the ingredients, but then they didn't follow through in a way that we were hoping.
And we're not just being spoiled brats and saying, they didn't do what we wanted them to do. Yeah. I'm all for being surprised and for a movie to do something to me that I didn't expect. In fact, we just saw If I Had Legs I'd Kick You, that was completely unpredictable, and I had no clue what was going on, and it was thrilling.
Oh, yeah.
The movie doesn't have to do what I want it to do.
No.
It just needs to follow through on the elements that it puts on screen, that it tells us about. If you really look at this film in particular, those are the main issues. It's mostly, like Jeannie perfectly diagnosed, it's a script problem. It's a polish problem. It's a structural problem that then further gets undone by the way they decided to portray the werewolves. For me, that's really it. Those are the only problems with this thing. That's what keeps it from being a great film. And if I was going to think of best werewolf movies since 2000, this probably would be like top 10 maybe for me. Being gracious. The truth is that there are a lot of horrible werewolf films.
We did see a few stinkers.
There's a lot of bad ones. Including The Last Wolfman, okay?
Yeah. Do you want to give your final thoughts?
Final thoughts.
You got thumbs up?
I say it's a tentative thumbs up. Being generous, because the most important element for me in a film is it entertaining? Is it fun? Is it make you feel like it was worth your time? And the answer for me on all three categories is yes.
I give it a very, very mild thumbs up. Very mild. I agree, though, that it was entertaining. It was just disappointing. It wasn't boring. And that's the key for me. It didn't think so much of itself that it put me in the no category where I would go, no, you don't know what you're doing here. I get angry sometimes when films say, oh, look at how cool we are. We're doing all this cool stuff and it's not good. That really pisses me off. This didn't do that. This was a serviceable film with great actors, great direction, great music, but there were other choices that could have been better made. Script problems, story problems, effects problems, some budgetary problems probably related to any of those. So it was an indie effort. I think the choices that were made weren't the greatest, and I would say most of the time they weren't. However, that didn't stop it from being an enjoyable film and a film that was not boring or slow. So I would cautiously recommend it. I'm not going to go around telling everybody to see it, but for all the reasons we discussed, if you're a horror aficionado, you should probably watch it.
Absolutely. If anything, you could have used a little more humor. Yeah. A little less sure of itself.
Right. Lean in a little bit. It's funny, you called it a tentative thumbs up. I think the film was tentative. I think the film didn't want to lean in too much into the horror, didn't want to lean too much into the lore, didn't want to lean too much into the character development. It was almost like, well, we're going to do a serviceable film. I feel like this was intentional. I feel that the only thing that leaned in a little bit that might have been a mistake as well was leaning into, let's do something different with the idea of a werewolf. And that's where the fault lies, I think. It didn't work. It experimented with that maybe a little too much. And I think that was intentional.
No, I agree. I think that it's done a lot of things very, very well, and it punches above its weight, and it does the most with its very limited budget. But at the same time, the short development time or the lack of ability to really spend time polishing the script to the nth degree ended up hurting it in the end. And like we talked about earlier, if he had more humor, if he took himself less seriously, if he had more fun with, for example, the overweight character, give him a better death than just getting grabbed in a bathroom. And we saw the holes in the door, and we have a close-up through a hole in the door.
But we don't really see
that was
him
it.
dying. Maybe they didn't want to be mean to certain characters.
Yeah, these characters deserve more interesting deaths.
Yeah, and I think that, again, they didn't lean in when they should have leaned in. They were too tentative, and they were experimenting a little too much on another level when they didn't need to.
Yes.
So it was kind of a misfire, but still a serviceable effort.
Okay.
All right. So I guess it's time to bid you adieu. Bye. For now.
For now.
Toodaloo.
Toodaloo.